Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. My name is Joey Schultz, and I'm joined as always by my fantastic co-hosts. Up first, he can't get over how, in the new Ixalan set, the You Descended mechanic is different than the Descend mechanic, which is also different than the Fathomless Descent mechanic. It's Matt Morgan.
So, I know that a shark can swim faster than me, but I'm pretty sure I can run faster than a shark. So in a triathlon, I think it comes down to who's a better cyclist.
Okay. Do you think you stand a good chance against that, the one then?
I mean, if you gave me a little bit to practice, probably, because I don't think his fins can reach the pedals on a bike. So I might actually win.
That's fair, but Matt, the card Shark Typhoon has cycling, so I want to say, according to Magic rules...
Wow.
Oh, well, now I'm just beat. I am in danger now.
Well played.
All right. Up next, you know, this one's not even a silly joke. He'd actually genuinely just like Wizards to stop giving everything Ward 2, please. Please, we're begging you. It's Dana Roach. Hi, Dana.
I had a rough day today. I wound up getting into a fight with a turkey of all things. He got in a few shots, but I knocked the stuffing out of him at the end.
That is the best part of Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, and I got out of there right afterwards. I didn't want to get accused of foul play or anything, so I just jumped on the gravy train and boogied out of town.
Oh,
You're on a roll. A dinner roll, even.
Our listeners are going to gobble that joke up, Dana. They're absolutely going to love it. All right. Hey, Matt, what are we talking about in this week's episode?
Well, this week we are going to give the definitive, undeniably concrete, and unassailable tier list, I guess, of what the best dual lands are for Commander.
Yeah, definitely definitive. Definitely, yeah. The end all be all for sure.
There will be absolutely zero discussion had on this list. It is going to be so complete. I would hate for our listeners to go to the comment section of YouTube and tell us exactly what lands they think we got wrong in this list.
Oh, goodness.
Absolutely would derail us if they went to the comment section.
I see what you're on about, man. This is hilarious. Yeah, we are going to do a dual land tier list. Basically, any color fixing stuff. We want to talk about our favorites, the ones that we do and don't play. I'm excited to get into this, but we've got some shout outs to do before we get to it.
First, we'd like to thank Chase, also known as Mana Curves, for helping editing the show. You can find them online at Mana Curves.
And if you would like to support the show, you can do so by liking and subscribing on YouTube. You can subscribe in your local podcast app, or you can go to patreon.com/EDHRECast, where we have patron tiers of all sorts of levels, whether you want to join the Discord community for as little as $2 a month. There's all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including the weekly patron shout out. So this week we are going to give a very special shout out, very, very special actually, because it is just a powerful name. But Matt Etheridge, thank you so much for your support, Matt. I just have to respect somebody with a just dominant, assertive first name. And so, Matt, you did it. And shout out to your cousin, Melissa. She's a great artist.
Matt, I cannot help but think that you might be a little bit biased here.
I've never said anything biased. I don't appreciate that accusation, Joey. Just Matt Etheridge, just solid human being.
No bias. Also, the tier list that we're going to do for this episode, definitely, purely 100% the definitive one. I love the confidence you're bringing to the show today, buddy.
I need it today because, just all this post-con crud just bringing me down. But no, it's not bringing us down. We are here to be penultimate professionals.
We're here to be the second to last professionals?
No, the super ultimate, the mega ultimate, kind of like this tier list that we're going to get to talking about right now.
All right. Yes. Okay. Let's get on track here. We are indeed doing a little tier list of the dual lands. And for folks who are watching on the YouTubes, we will have that on screen that we can sort around. We'll talk about the different dual lands that exist in Commander and whether we rank them as S tier, A tier, B, C, D, all the way to F tier, which are the ones that we would or would not play above a basic land and things like that. And I guess, I guess we're just going to get right started into it. There are plenty of other folks who have done tier lists out there for things like this, but as Matt said, we are penultimate professionals, and this is apparently the definitive one. So, guys, let's get right to it. We've got our tier list here, and the first thing that we're talking about is, of course, the original dual lands, the ABUR dual lands, the Underground Seas, and all of them. I assume we just slammed these right into S tier, yeah?
Yeah.
I would even argue that they're in the OP tier, as in overpriced tier, as far as what they bring to your deck.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, and unless you're playing a 4 or 5 color deck, do these make that much of a difference? I mean, they are considerably better than everything else out there, but it's one card in a deck. Like, the amount of situations where it changes the outcome of the game, and it's true of all of these lands, are pretty minimal. That said, they're fetchable by a whole bunch of different means. They never come into play tapped, and maybe most importantly, they make other lands better, which is not necessarily a thing you could say about many lands. They let you hit thresholds for various things that allow other lands to come into play untapped. So, as someone who has ran these in the past, in the last couple of years, taken them out of decks, I can't say that I've missed them at all. It hasn't really changed how my decks perform, but undoubtedly there's just nothing better.
Yeah. I think that it's safe to put those into S tier, but also, like, they're kind of a who cares about them as well. It's just like, yeah, they're the best lands, but they're also, like, ridiculously overpriced, as you said, Matt, and, like, whatever. The price to win ratio is a little bit off here, but, like, you can't not put them in S tier, boring as it is kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, they're like, instead of buying an Underground Sea, you can just build a whole new powerful deck, and that seems like a better use of money to me. And anything else, I mean, we're just kind of beating around the bush.
Yeah. So that moves us on to fetch lands, like the Misty Rainforests and all of them. Dana, where are you feeling?
They're a little bit time-consuming and frustrating, and, like, I don't subscribe to the notion that you can run a whole bunch of these to thin out your deck. Mathematically, it's been proven that doesn't really work in Commander. It barely works in 60-card formats, at least in terms of, like, the price you pay for actually, losing life and things of that nature to thin your deck out. That's just not a mathematical thing. But they're very useful, and maybe in a weird, unique way, because they can go fetch any basic land type, they fix whatever particular problem you're having in a way that very few other lands do. Whatever mana you're short of, you can grab that, and the color you're second most short of. They're pretty fantastic. I happen to have a bunch of them from back in Khans of Tarkir era. I put them in every 2-color deck, even though I don't know how much of a difference it makes. It's just nice being able to have a land that will solve whatever problems you have.
Fetches are expensive. Most of them are at least $20, if not more. Even with all the reprints that we've gotten, you can get other fetchable dual lands, but in a lot of cases, those are expensive. The shock lands that we're going to talk about and the triomes, those aren't cheap dual lands or tri lands in some instances. And so the cost is beyond just the actual price tag on the fetch land itself. Yes, fetches are very, very powerful, but there's also a lot you have to take into account beyond just like, okay, I bought a fetch land, now what?
See, I'm feeling that these also belong in the S tier. Like this is where I'm leaning because of the extra stuff that they lead. Like there can be sacrifice energies in your deck. You can get these back with like Crucible of Worlds. Savine's Reclamation can affect those. If you ever need to shuffle your library, if you are indeed playing brainstormy type of effects in your deck. If you need landfall triggers, like the color flexibility that these offer you is one thing, and they also enhance so many other types of lands. But like the other doors that they open, I'm just like, in terms of what lands can do, this one has a utility beyond color fixing that I feel is kind of unmatched by many other dual lands we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. So these belong in the S for me as well.
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah, landfall utility, I mean, that's also something that you kind of get to play around with. So yeah, I do agree they're probably S tier just on power alone. But there's other factors I think a lot of players need to make sure they keep in mind when putting fetches in their decks.
Very, very fair. So that brings us to shock lands now. I mean, we all know and love these. Where do shock lands go?
The only thing I would say about Shockland is because technically they are a worse version of ABUR duels, I would have a tough time also putting them on S tier, because that's what they are. They're just an ABUR duel. They have the same basic subtypes. They work in the same way, except for they only come into play untapped if you pay 2 life. They're amazing and probably the next best land cycle out there after ABUR duels and fetches. But for myself, I think that just disqualifies them, and they would be the start of the A tier here for me.
So basically, Dana, what you're saying is, pepperoni pizza is just a worse version of Meat Lovers pizza. So because of that, because Meat Lovers is S tier,
kind of,
pepperoni isn't as good. So it's that doesn't make any sense. Pepperoni can still be S tier. Like,
I'm with Matt here.
A slightly less good version of something doesn't automatically mean it's not good. It's not Meat Lovers, but it's still pizza.
Here's the thing for me, like, am I going to put these in a deck more than just a 2-color deck? Like, this is where I start to think of, like, would this go in a 3-color deck? Would this go in a 4-color deck? Would I even put these in a 5-color deck? And the answer is yes. Like, I consider, like, the fact that, oh, sure, the ABUR dual lands exist at S tier, sure. But they also don't exist at S tier because who has these? Who's bothering to go and pay the money for these? So, like, S stands for Shocklands as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, I'm not gonna argue against how good they are. Absolutely, if you guys would absolutely want them on S tier, I made my semantical argument about why I wouldn't put them there, but that's entirely what it is. It's semantics. So I am absolutely not going to doubt that they're powerful.
S for Supreme, as in the pizza that Dana also hates.
100% do not like Supreme pizza.
How about the dual lands are S plus and these are just S, or these are S
well,
minus?
now it's getting too complicated.
Yeah, that's too much.
Okay. I'm just like, they still go there is all I'm saying. All right, that'll take us on to, I think these are called like the crowd lands, but they're like the battle bound style of lands.
Yeah.
Where they enter tapped as long as you have multiple opponents. Okay, I'll fire off here. For me, these are also fully S tier. I can't think of a reason that I would put these below, but I'm not sure where you guys stand.
I also think these are S tier. These are just great.
Okay.
They're to me, how good a card is at pretty much any stage of the game is kind of a big deal. And these are always just good. If you're entering these tapped, the game's probably over already, and it's not depending on one extra land drop coming in untapped.
Or the game's gone really well so far for you because you've killed off 2 other opponents. Yeah.
Yeah, so I love these. Whenever they get reprinted and you can get them for $3 a pop, absolutely worth just stocking up. I do that every time they get reprinted, and they're just great because they go in pretty much every deck. These are probably one of my most played land cycles right here.
Big same.
All right, I have to push back here.
Okay.
What you guys are trying to do is include a really nice souped up Subaru in the same category as a Ferrari. And while that Subaru may be real nice, a Ferrari it is not. I absolutely like these Battle Bond lands a lot. They are fantastic. They are not fetchable. They don't make your other lands better. They are excellent. They are S tier, not. So these would absolutely be the first land in A tier. They just aren't that like almost perfect creation like you see with those first 3. And I think including these alongside ABR duels, fetches, and even shocks devalues how good those lands are by comparison.
No, abs. I don't agree with that last part.
And I also, at some point, then you start looking at, do I include these in a 3 or 4 or 5 color deck?
Yeah.
Maybe in a 3, but am I including them in a 5 color deck where I've got a bunch of I have 10 shocks. I probably have a handful of fetches. I'm running the City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Exotic Archer, stuff like that. I'm absolutely not running a full cycle of these. I might run a couple, but
there you go.
I think that's where we're getting knocked down to A tier. They are not that elite top line land, and if you guys want to include them in the top, then you're welcome to be wrong, but they should not be in the S tier. Nothing else should belong there.
I will support this argument because of the points you brought up. They don't have any basic land types, so you can't really fetch them very well. That's a huge, huge factor. They don't make other lands around you better. I support this significantly more than saying that pepperoni pizza is not also S tier. The argument for these being an A tier, I think, is a little bit better because eventually you do have to separate them. I still personally would put them into my S tier, but I understand the arguments against them, and I do see where you're coming from with these.
Well, my vote is also for S, so that's 2 out of 3, unless, Matt, you're kind of the swing vote here. Where are we putting this one?
I mean, it is fun upsetting Dana, so I'm going to vote for S tier. I just think that these are because they're so reliably untapped, and we can make caveats about everything, like, okay, well, in a 5 color, they get less good, or whatever you want to say. Man, they're so powerful in the decks they are powerful in, that I think that they still do carry the weight of an S tier.
All right, cool. Then that is where we shall place them. Dana, I understand the arguments, and if it makes you feel better, this next one that we're getting to...
I guess you guys are just lumping everything into S tier, so like we're putting them where there's all S tiers from here on out, I guess.
No, it's really not, because the next one we're talking about are check lands. Like Dragon Skull Summit enters untapped only if you control a mountain or a swamp. I can definitely say I'm not putting these at S tier.
Right.
I might not even be putting them at A tier. I think that these maybe fall at the B range for me.
Oh, these for me is exactly where A tier should start. These are absolutely great. If all you need is one basic land type of whatever you need. So that's so incredible. Unless you're Dana, it's incredibly easy to do, I should say.
That's just it, right?
It counts off your duels. It counts off your triomes. Anything that just has a basic land type. In pretty much any color deck, these are fantastic, whether it's 2-color or 5-color. I think that these are very, very good, especially the price for like the dollar amount that you have to pay on these. I think check lands is that perfect balance of they're a few bucks, but you're getting a lot of value out of those couple bucks that you're spending on these check lands.
B tier at best.
Ooh.
Okay. So you and I are more aligned on this one.
They are not fetchable. It's really easy to get burned by them, particularly in the early game. If you don't they get better if you have ABUR duels, but it's really easy to miss out on these unless you are running
basics,
more basics than I run.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is Dana's deck building knocking these down.
But like if you're running like me, if you're running 8 to 10 basics and a shock land and maybe something else, it's really easy to have these come into play tapped. And I don't want to have to think about my lands. I want them to work every single time. That for me, that's what most matters. And these don't work every single time for me. So that knocks them down to at least B tier for me.
I also follow on that because these are the kind of things that if you are having a lot of utility lands in your deck, these are the considerations that you have to start making. The fact that they can upset your tempo, even if it is a little bit unusual. I guess actually here's where I'd put an A tier is something that I would still consider in a 4 or a 5 color deck, and I wouldn't play these in a 4 or 5 color deck. I've even taken these out of some 3 color decks before.
Yeah.
Because I have had some issues with color fixing along that line in a way that I haven't with the Battle Bond lands, for example.
I have pulled them from 3 color decks as well, Joey. So that has what's shaped my opinion as well.
Still like them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm still better than a basic most of the time for sure. So I think B is still very respectable. But sorry, Matt, I think this time you're the one who's getting outvoted.
You're allowed to be wrong. Like Dana said, if we're allowed to be wrong, then both of you are.
All right, into the B range it goes just by virtue of the vote. Moves us to pain lands now, like Brushland and Darkar Wastes and stuff like that. It's just untapped, can be a colorless, or you can tap for 1 of 2 colors and it, hurts you just a tiny, tiny little bit. Solid A tier for me, but where are you guys at?
Definite A tier here. I think these are maybe one of the more underappreciated land cycles in the game.
Ooh.
I think people get way too scared off by losing a single life. You only really lose that life the first couple turns of the game. By turn 4 or 5, even if you drop it on turn 1, you can play around that damage really easily by tapping them for a colorless mana. Being able to tap them for a colorless mana is relevant sometimes. There are situations where you need to produce that for various Eldrazi things.
Sure.
You can get additional colorless mana if you have Forsaken Monument out. That's cropped up for me on more than one occasion in decks that run that. I just don't have to think about them. They always come into play untapped. They always make me the mana I want. And in situations where I'm low on life, it's almost always one where I can work around the damage it gets dealt. So for me, exactly what I'm looking for in a land, no muss, no fuss, solve the problem, get it done, A tier.
I love how you're saying all these things about the pain lands, but then you are so low on the battle lands. It's just bewildering to me that you're so high on.
I wasn't low on the battle lands. I wanted them to be in A tier as well.
That's fair.
I think I would include them side by side.
Oh, that does line up. I feel you. Matt, where are you with these?
I am not huge on these. With a shock land, at least, you're only losing 2 life. With these, it might be more because, say, maybe things don't go right. These and another land cycle that also causes you to lose life, they're in B tier for me. I don't love... Yes, they do come into play untapped. And in certain decks, when you corner case it a little bit, yeah, the colorless mana does definitely have some upside. But you could lose a significant amount of life over the course of a game to some of these types of lands, and that puts them in B tier for me. But I understand why, but I'm not very high on these.
I feel like I've never paid more than 3 for these, and 3 life is the range that I would get. If I'm willing to shock into a shock land, if I'm willing to fetch into a shock land, that's already going to be 3 life right there. If I'm willing to do that, then I'm willing to pay potentially 3 life for these as well. And I feel like I almost never actually do. And I definitely like the fact that these will never disrupt tempo. And Dan, I love what you said about how the colorless cost can sometimes be relevant. So yeah, I think that A is a place that I'm inclined to put these as well, is what it sounded like.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
But that life loss does move us to the next one that you just hinted at, Matt, and that's Horizon Canopy, or just the Horizon lands in general. They cost a life to use every time, but you can pay a mana tap, sacrifice them, and draw a card later on. You said B tier for these?
For me personally, these are B tier. Again, you don't have the option to tap for colorless and not lose life on these, so whenever you're tapping them for mana, you are losing a life. Being able to cantrip out is nice and all, but in a format like Commander, I think some of the power that makes them prestigious almost in Modern in those 60 card formats, I don't think it really carries over as much as it would in Commander. Yeah, being able to get rid of lands to draw and cantrip out is nice, but there are other lands that do that, a little more expensive for sure, but I'm not very high on those. So these are B tier. They're fine. I'm not going to blame anybody for playing these, but I just, especially for the monetary investment to get some of these lands, I don't think it's worth it.
I am with Matt here on calling these B tier as well for the reasons he mentioned. I think the myth that Horizon Canopy brought with it from how much of a powerhouse it was in Modern impacts how people perceive them in EDH to this day. Horizon Canopy was the only one in this cycle for a long time, and I think that kind of built up how powerful it was in people's brains. And that power level in Commander isn't necessarily commensurate to what it was in Modern. Because one card in a format where you're, casting relatively low cost spells is a whole different deal than one card in a multiplayer format where you're casting larger spells. And at least personally, I found the amount of situations where I'm willing to get rid of that one land to draw a card is different than it is in a competitive format. The only time I ever wind up using these really is when it's this thing just happened I wasn't ready for. Well, maybe I'll top deck a Swords to Plowshares and not die to the Blightsteel. But aside from that, that's the only time I wind up cracking these.
Sure.
So I feel like the utility on them is something you're paying a cost in terms of trading a life every turn, and I cash in on that utility way less frequently than I pay the life. So I think these are perfectly fine, but I don't like them as much as people do in say Modern.
Gotcha. Okay. I had these at A, but I'm being outvoted here, and I'm perfectly fine with that. You guys have made some really good arguments for these, especially the timing of when you do cash them out. That does make sense. I do still play them in 3-color decks. 4 and above, I'm I probably wouldn't for those. I was really happy to see these reprinted in the Doctor Who decks, for example. I was just thank goodness.
Sure.
Yeah, so I love seeing them in pre-con mana bases, but B, it seems like a solid place for them to go. I'm happy to be outvoted here. That brings us to a fun little thing here. We've got the fast lands and the slow lands, the ones that enter untapped if you have 2 or fewer lands versus more lands. So, concealed courtyard versus deserted beach and things like that. Matt, I know you have some strong opinions about the fast lands. Let's talk about fast lands and slow lands, you guys.
So the fast lands, we want to talk about how much power you get for the monetary investment. Maybe the only thing worse at one point in time than the duels was when Black Cleave Gifts was $50. People were clamoring to put those into their commander decks. It was well, it's $50, it must be good. No, it's not. It's not great at all, because unless you draw it in your opening hand, it's going to come into play tapped. You just play a gate at that point. I don't love these. These are, in my tier, these are C tier for Commander. At least the fast lands are.
Oh, I've got them at D.
Okay, that you convinced me. That's all you had to say.
Yeah, I'd rather play a basic than the fast lands almost every time. I don't like them.
So these ones probably have the most flex based on what the power level of your meta is, or power level of your deck, I should say. I understand the logic if you are playing at the absolute cutting edge, if you are playing a C88 style game where you need to be making plays every single turn and you have to do something on turn 1 or 2, or you are not in the same game the way everyone else is. They are a much different beast there than they are outside of there. So I'm doing this evaluation based on how I play and the people that I know tend to play. And I'm going to put them down at C or D tier.
Cool.
I would not run these, and I have none of them in a deck right now, and I can't imagine a situation aside from me trying to play competitively where I would run them.
Sure, yeah.
Now on the other hand, the slow lands are fantastic. They are a solid A tier for me.
Oh, happily A, yeah.
For the same reason, basically, the fast lands come into play for me, who tends to play games that go 10 turns. That means the fast lands come into play tapped 80% of the time, and the slow lands come into play untapped 80% of the time. It's just a very clear-cut difference in how they perform for me based on the length of games I tend to play at.
Absolute same. I'm totally co-signing on A tier. I love these. I've even played these in 4-color decks, and I've never had an issue with them disrupting my tempo or getting the colors that I need, even in those situations. I absolutely love those and would love to see them reprinted all the ding-dang time. I love the slow lands.
My check lands never come into play tapped, but I'm just doing things better, kind of like how I segue better into challenge stats segments.
What if we both say it at the same time? Does that also, can I get a half point on segueing?
No, because you can't interrupt me and oh, I stole this from you. I invented this. That's what you were doing.
That's what you did to me when you first started taking my segue into challenge the stats, though, Matt. I'm just trying to get it back by any means necessary.
Show me the receipts on that one. The listeners will know. They're going to be in the comment section already in this episode.
True.
So we'll see what they say.
All right, yeah, we'll take a quick pause from all of the ranking of the lands. We've got plenty more to go. But yeah, there's a bit of data on EDHREC that we've got to challenge, so let's take a quick break and come back with that. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. This time of year can be a lot. The holidays are approaching, the weather is weathering, and it's very natural to feel anxiety or even sadness about those things. It's natural, too, to want to talk about those feelings with someone, and adding something new and positive to your routine can counteract some of those feelings. And therapy can be a bright spot amidst all the stress and change, something to look forward to, something to make you feel grounded, and to give you the tools to help manage everything that's going on. Which is why I'm glad to tell you this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is entirely online, so even if it's cold and icy out, you can still get talking to a licensed professional therapist to help you feel more in tune with yourself. Just fill out a quick questionnaire and they'll match you with a licensed therapist, and you can switch anytime, no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/EDH today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/EDH. All right, I'm going to start us off for Challenge the Stats this week, and I've got an overplayed card in the deck, Faldorn Dread Wolf Herald, which folks may remember from the Baldur's Gate precons. This precon, right out of the box, just absolutely slaps. So many wolves this thing can make. It is the 3-mana 3/3 human druid in Gruul that says whenever you cast a spell from exile, or a land enters the battlefield under your control from exile, you create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, and you can pay 1 mana, tap Faldorn, and discard a card to exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. Again, this deck absolutely, seriously is so good. I know a lot of folks are enamored of Prosper because of all the treasure tokens that that one can make, but if you want to also play more stuff from exile in slightly different colors, Faldorn will get a lot of stuff going. I do want to be a bit critical, however, of the card Terramorph on Faldorn's page. It shows up in 39% of the 4,800 Faldorn decks out there, and it's a pretty interesting land-searching spell. I actually do like the design of this card a lot. It's a 4-mana green sorcery that searches your library for a basic land card, puts it right onto the battlefield, and then you shuffle, and it has Rebound. So Rebound says, if you cast a spell from your hand, you exile it as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. So that's pretty cool. You will get the, played from exile trigger off of Faldorn, right, with that Rebound, so you'd make a wolf token. And that seems pretty neat. The issue that I have with it is that decks like Faldorn's tend to play so many of those impulse draw effects that often your spells will wind up in exile, inspired tinkering type of spells, or the reckless impulse and things like that, that you could very well be playing this card from exile in the first place, which won't get the Rebound effect, because Rebound only happens when you cast the spell from your hand. Even if you want to discard this card with Faldorn's own tap ability, you will miss out on Rebound stuff. So I'm a little critical of this particular land searcher in Faldorn decks. I think you can play potentially some other stuff that you'll actually get a bit more direct benefit off of, a little bit more bang for your buck, as it were, given the 4-mana nature of this ramp spell. So be a little bit critical of Rebound spells when you're playing stuff from exile as your main strategy. So that is my challenge. How about you guys?
Well, my challenge is a quick and easy hitter. So looking at the stats, we've talked about how Divination is kind of it's a fine, budget filler card, whatever. It's still being played in 10,000 decks. And so whether you like it or not, it's still a relatively popular card. But we now have a better version, and we don't get to say strictly better very often, but we actually do in this case because Quick Study was just printed. So it is 2 and a blue for an instant that just says draw 2 cards. Compare that to Divination, which was 2 and a blue for a sorcery, which also said draw 2 cards. It's a pretty quick swap. Unless you specifically have to be casting sorceries, there's not really any reason other than you want multiple copies of this effect to not be playing Quick Study. I got to cast it a whole bunch at all the Wilds of Eldraine events that I've gone to so far. It's just great. Being able to speed things up, holding your mana up, staying flexible with when you want to cast spells is incredibly powerful. So if you need a quick and easy upgrade, if you're still playing Divination or you just want to finally play this effect, Quick Study, absolutely great. It's 20 cents. Perfect timed upgrade.
I can't believe Divination is still in 10,000
decks. Wow. And it was in pre-constructed decks for a while too, so that's probably why it kind of got some numbers fluffed. Mm-hmm. But people are still putting it into decks. But Quick Study is absolutely great. It's absolutely worth considering. If you need a draw a spell, just quick and efficient, Quick Study is a great way to do it.
Well, last but not least here, we have a challenge from a listener, Gordon Finlay. And Gordon's challenge is for Twinkali Hunter in Gralnock decks. Twinkali Hunter is a adventure card. The sorcery portion of it is retrieve prey, costing 1 and a green. Exile target creature card from your graveyard, and until the end of your next turn, you may cast that card. But most relevant here is the Twinkali Hunter portion, 5 and 2 green for a Scorpion Scout, a 7/7 with Trample. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than paying the mana cost for a creature spell you cast from exile. Why this is particularly relevant in Gralnock decks is whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, you exile it with a Crow counter on it, and you can play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with Croak counters on them. So you have a commander that's putting creatures specifically into exile, and this lets you basically cast once a turn one of those creatures for free. Right now, it is only showing up in about 100 decks of the over 4,000 Gralnock lists on our database. Being able to drop just about any giant creature from exile onto the battlefield on your turn for free is really, really good. And because of how Twinkali works, you can free cast flash creatures like, say, Mystic Snake on other players' turns if they're in exile, giving you a 0 mana counterspell as well. It's just a really good card, and in that kind of deck especially, should see more play than just 103 lists that are running it.
Yeah, I dig it. Thank you so much for the challenge, Gordon. That one's awesome. All right, guys, we are getting back into our topic here. We've got a lot more dual land stuff to start ranking, and maybe a couple of other fun additional mana fixers to talk about later on as well. Just, stuff helping to fix the colors. We are going to move on now to the Sunken Hollow cycle. I think that people call these like Tango lands. They have both basic land types, but they enter untapped only if you control 2 or more basic lands. I'm conflicted about these.
So let's just get out of the way. Dana put these in D tier because they never come into play untapped.
Thumbs down. No, these are decent. I'm trying to ignore my own personal playstyle and how they work. But even if I ran more basics, I let's say I was running like 7 of each color in a 2-color deck, that still doesn't feel consistent enough for me. Particularly today when there's so many land cycles out there that I feel like just do the thing I want them to do. So I don't have anything against these, but I think they're just a little too hit or miss for me personally. I would probably put them in B tier. Yeah. Nothing against them, and they're useful, but I just tend to not run them because they don't work for the way I brew.
I love them in 2-color decks. Dana, I was really worried that you were going to say, we got to put them in C tier or below. And I was just like, oh, because you were talking a little bit down on them. But B is a perfectly respectable grade for these. Yeah. And B is where I had them as well.
Well, I'm trying not to grade too much based on my own weird brewing idiosyncrasies.
See, I like these. Of all the budget fetchable dual cycles, these are probably one of the best.
Yeah.
All you need, especially if you're playing green, these are absolutely great because a simple Cultivate or Kadama's Reach means you have all the basics you need to do this. There's only 2. And so even if your games go 10 turns and you draw these on turn 5, if you're playing green, more than likely, these are coming into play untapped. I think these are absolutely fantastic. I would personally put them in A tier. Again, these are like baby's first fetchable duel, kind of showing you the power of these. I think they're great. I understand B tier is probably where they're, again, putting my bias aside. Dana has to put his aside to keep them out of D tier. I probably have to put my bias aside to keep them out of A. I think B is a perfectly respectable slot, even though personally I would put them a little bit higher.
No, I think the only reason that I wouldn't put them in A tier is because they do get worse with more colors in your deck.
Sure.
And that is what keeps them out of the A range for me. But B...
Only if you're playing fewer basics.
But once you get to 4 or 5 colors, Matt, it's kind of like, oh, kind of really. But you're absolutely right, especially them being the best budget fetchable. I absolutely adore these. In a way that I don't necessarily always adore the next ones, which are these cycling lands. I think some people call them bicycle lands because they are 2-colored lands. They also have both land types, like Canyon Slough is one that we'll use an example here. So it's a swamp and a mountain, but it always enters tapped, but it does have cycling too, so you can discard it from your hand to draw a card. I got to put cycling at C just because of just like C for cycling and the fact that these are always tapped. They're budget fetchables. I respect the crap out of these, but there are occasions where I would prefer to have drawn a basic land over these, and that's sort of what C tier means to me. So compared to the ones we just talked about, these feel like a step below to me.
Yeah, they are a step below for sure. And if I'm putting them a step below the Tango lands, for example, they would be a B tier for me. Yeah, the fact that they are always coming to play tapped, it is a definite drawback. But the fact that you don't ever have to play them tapped is also a benefit. You can get rid of them. I think there's a lot of flexibility. I think these are probably a little bit more flexible than the Horizon lands, where you're going to lose a bunch of life. You're going to have to sack it and get rid of it. You don't ever have to play these. I think that's the nice part. And if you do want to fetch, that's fine. I think they're B tier. But also looking at the tiers that we've already set up, probably the C tier is fine. I do think they're better than a basic, but I can't put them any lower than C just because it's a cheap fetchable duel.
I mean, there's a handful at this point now of cheap fetchable duels. There's a couple other budget ones, and having played those, there isn't really functionally a difference between like the ones that fill a slot at uncommon in a draft archetype and these based on how they perform. I don't think against them, they're fine, I guess, but like I'm not running them in almost any of my decks at this point, and as new cycles come out, these are the decks that still run them, the one or two that I still have one of these are probably the first ones to go. So that feels like a C tier land to me.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to put Canyon Slough, the cycling land, at C tier. It just feels like, there's just a nice harmony there to all of the alliteration of the C.
C is for cycling, and that is good enough for me, so I can live with that.
Cool. This next one, I want to slam directly into D tier. I do not like these. The Snarls, the Reveal lands, or Port Town is another thing.
D tier is being complimentary to them, but that is probably where they belong.
The Reveal lands, you have to reveal either a plains or a swamp from your hand for Shine Snarl to enter untapped. I hate seeing these in precons so much. I do not like these. If they're fine on a budget, it's like, sure, whatever. But even then, honestly, even on a budget, sometimes I'm just like, why? Just like I would prefer to play some of those things that have dual types, even if they always enter tapped. Like the Radiant Groves of the world and stuff like that. I really don't care for these.
I think they are a very elegantly designed land cycle that works really well in a limited environment, and we're not playing that. I have nothing against them, like conceptually, but there's just too many good options in EDH to run these. All the things I said about the check lands and why I don't love those are true about the Snarls twice over.
Yeah.
Because you're even that much less likely to have the land in your hand to meet the threshold to have them come into play on tap than you are to have one in play. So, just no reason for me to run these ever.
So we like to point out that the way that Dana builds his decks influences his tiers. The way that literally anybody plays in their decks should influence how bad these are. These are absolute dookie butter. Get these out. I hate seeing these in precons because it alludes to newer players that these are powerful lands. They are not.
Yeah, no. All right, right into D tier. Like, I can't give them a failing grade because every so often they do sometimes work, but like deeply unexcited to play these, and in most cases I would prefer to have a basic.
I will note that the redeeming quality of these is if you are playing on a really tight budget in a 2-color deck and you're running like 15 of each basic, these are a pretty good inclusion compared to like a Guildgate, because in that kind of environment where you're running so many basics just to save money, well, they're almost always going to come into play untapped then, because of the sheer amount of basics you have. But outside of that weird environment where you're running 30 basics in a deck, there's just no reason to play these. So that's the one redeeming quality they have.
And that's just it. I'd rather use a Nature's Lore to go and find a Radiant Grove.
Sure.
That's where I'm at with these things. That like, if they're always going to enter tapped, I might as well have some ability to fetch them out with some of that. Anyway, okay, we got to move on. Temples are next. The ETB tapped all of the time, but when they enter, you scry one. I'm very curious to see where you guys would place these.
So I like Temples. Of all of the non-fetchable dual cycles that are always going to come into play tapped, this is the only cycle I will routinely play in decks. Mm-hmm. I think the Scry 1, especially attached to a land, it's low-key actually like pretty good. It helps smooth out your draws. I like it a lot. Personally, I can't put it below B tier. My gut, just be personal bias in there, is maybe A tier, but
really? Okay.
B tier is the lowest I would accept.
Okay.
These going in there.
I have nothing against these, and everything Matt has said is true of them, but I've also found that like there's enough lands that, despite those positives you just noted, that I think are better. Mm-hmm. It's like I just don't play these anymore. I don't have these in any deck at this point, and that's not because they're not useful. It's just because there's enough lands that are better, and these have gotten just pushed out of my decks over the course of the last, 5-ish years or so. As a result of that, I think I kind of got to put them in a C tier if I'm not running them. And it's also one of those things where I feel like they get worse every time they make a new good cycle too. These are the first kind of lands you're looking to remove because they just always come into play tapped.
Interesting. I think at once upon a time these might have been A for me. I think I'm going to end up splitting the difference between you guys. And B feels like Matt, I agree with you. I do still play. I think I have a couple of 3-color decks that do still run these. But like, I don't know. Actually, no. Yeah, the deck that I play these in is my Yannette deck, where like manipulating the top of my deck is actually pretty darn important. And like when you play these and it saves you like, oh, thank goodness, I'm not going to draw this forest, right. And like saves you a card. That is a really good feeling.
Yeah.
And so I do appreciate that little bit of utility in terms of something that enters tapped. This is the one that I am always most excited to see. And I think that does have to budget into B tier for me, because there are cases even in like my 2-color decks or whatever where I'm more excited to see these than I am to see a basic, and that would definitely put it above C tier for me, because C is where I'm debating whether it's a basic, but like I do feel excited about these. I do especially like them on turn 1.
Yeah, B tier it is then.
B tier. Now we've got a pair of filter lands to talk about, both the Shadowmoor filters and the Odyssey filters, also known as the Signet lands. So these are kind of interesting because the Shadowmoor filters, you have to pay one of the color into it to activate them so that you can get, for example, either 2 blue or a red and a blue or 2 red. Whereas the Signet lands, you can pay any type of mana into it and it will produce just both of the colors that you need. Like Darkwater Catacombs, you pay a generic into it and you get a blue and a black. So we've got a pair of filter lands here. Do they land in similar places for you guys?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a big fan of these, probably more so than most people. I'd be very tempted to put both of these in A tier. I definitely would put the filters in A tier. And I'm strongly considering the Odyssey filters in there as well. I've just never had a problem with these at all. What? They always get the job done, and they never come into play tapped. I've just never had an issue with them, and I consider the Odyssey filters one of the cycles I wish they would really finish, because I feel like every 2-color deck I would run these, and we're a ways away from getting enough lands to bump them out for me. They do what I need lands to do every time.
We need to get you to bed, Dana. This is this is wild to me. Especially the Signet lands. They're fine. The Lorwyn cycle, being able to tap for mana on their own, is a benefit, so I'd put them a little bit above, but I would put maybe B tier at the top for either of these.
Oh, this is interesting.
I don't love these.
The color restriction on the Shadowmoor filter lands is that I have had that sometimes burn me. Mm-hmm. But I also really do like them. Like I don't think I have these in 3-color decks, but the interesting thing about the Signet lands is that I actually do feel comfortable. Like they've reprinted those in some of the 4-color precons, and it felt good to do that. Mm-hmm. Like there is a flexibility with both of these, so I don't dislike any of them. But A tier feels really strong, because I can think of moments where I have been a little bit like, God dang it, these are messing with my colors in the way that I don't need them to do right now. So I do tend to be a little bit more restrictive to where I play them. Like the Shadowmoor filters, I think I kind of only have in 2-color decks right now, but they are bangers in those 2-color decks. So I'm a little conflicted here.
I would put the Lorwyn filters in B tier. I would put the Signet lands in C tier, because like you said, Joey, having to need mana of a certain color to activate them kind of burns you. Only ever being able to produce exactly a blue and a black, for example, that has burned me before. And so I've had enough situations come up where I needed to be an either or, not definitely this and this. So I've been burnt by the Signet lands enough. C tier for me.
But Dana said both at A tier, so are we splitting the difference on here again?
I would definitely say, I would say Lorwyn's an A and the filters in B.
The Odyssey filters, happy to put them into B, but I'm not sure where to put do we put them in the A?
I think B is fine.
Oh no, am I splitting the vote? Matt did steal my challenge to stats segue, so maybe I side with Dana on this one.
Yeah.
Are you seriously putting them in A?
I think they're that good.
I mean, do what you want. The listeners are definitely not going to let us know that you messed this one up real bad in the comment section.
All right, just for your impudence, now I have to. Yeah, I'm happy to put them.
That's fine. I need a shower after that one.
No, come on. It's again with a thing about tempo. Like, but then again, I did actually say earlier that like A tier would be something I wouldn't, like, I'm not going to play these in a 4 or 5-color deck basically ever. And I did kind of hint that that was a qualification for me for A tier, but I will abandon my morals just to stick it to Matt this one time. I'm okay with that.
I mean, the problem with that qualification, Joey, is with 4 different land cycles in the S tier. Of course, you're not going to run anything else. There's not enough slots in a deck, really, to run a bunch of these in 5-color decks.
Very fair. Also very true. All right. Matt, these next ones, you've got strong opinions about.
I do. So the pathway lands that we saw, the dual-faced land cycle, I do not like these. D tier for do not like.
Wow. What?
I think they're fine for constructed formats. In standard, where you really just need to be able to pick one or the other. The fact that these do not tap for either mana, like once you play it, that is there. That to me is an instant. Well, how is it really all that much better than a basic at that point? Because it effectively does become a basic, except it doesn't have a basic type. There's so much going on with these. I want my duels to give me both options at any given point in the game. These only do it once, and that's where I really just fall short on these.
It fixes well enough for me, and they don't come into play tapped. I think these are a strong B tier. Yeah, they're not fetchable. Yeah, you have to make a decision, but I think if you are a player paying attention to your base, that's fine. You can make a determination based on what's already out or what you have in your hand that I'm going to need this color more than that color. Good enough for me. I think these are a solid B tier. And again, this is one of those situations where, like, when I'm looking to replace a land in a deck, my eyes don't linger very long on these. I'm looking for something else because I feel like they always get the job done.
I mean, the argument you use for these, well, if you just pay attention to your mana base, they're fine. You can make that argument for like all the other ones that I was talking about that are good that you didn't like.
No, I'm like in the moment. I'm saying like you have to brew. I have to brew around check lands. These don't have to brew around, I don't think.
Here, I actually do feel like I have to brew around them a little bit because I take these out of 3-color decks.
Oh, yeah,
because
sure.
My mana needs will definitely change, and often drastically as the game goes on in a 3-color deck.
And that's another strike against them.
I do like them, but I had them written down as C.
I will just make this note about that argument. I'm not going to disagree with you necessarily, but given the amount of lands that we have available, not qualifying for a 3-color deck is a super high bar to clear. If you're running a 3-color deck and you're putting in 3 fetches and ignoring the ABUR duels, 3 shocks, 3 of the battle bond lands, a couple of the multicolor fixers, a few utility lands, you're already out of slots.
Yeah.
Like I think fitting in a 3-color deck isn't really necessarily something that should disqualify something from like the B-ish tier because nothing makes that cut, or very few lands make that cut. I just want to make that note. I don't necessarily disagree with your point on these because they are limited, but I think there's a lot of things that aren't going to measure up to that.
Yeah, you know what? Okay, yeah. Dana, upon reflection, you have persuaded me. I said I don't play the MDFC duels in 3-color decks or more, but I can't put them at C because C is my tier of there's a debate whether this card is better than a basic land. And I don't have that debate with these. Like,
sure.
With the exception of random cards counting like however many swamps I have, which I already don't play a whole lot of those in 2-color decks anyways,
sure.
These are better than a basic. There isn't really much debate there for me because they enter untapped and they give me an option. So I do side with Dana here. We will slam these into B tier and we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's keep scooting.
Sure.
Yeah, all right. Creature lands are up next. A bunch of dual lands that can turn into creatures. Celestial Colonnade, Hissing Quagmire, things like that. I'm also inclined to say C for creature lands, just, again, because of some of the alliteration, like woohoo. But where are y'all at?
Same. C tier for creature. That's also right where I think they go. I don't remember the last time that I had a creature land in a deck and actually activated it. And that's just, again...
Exactly.
We're talking about personal playstyle, but if you're doing something like that, unless you have specific synergies built into... some of these, I mean, I have one in my Raga Draga deck, but even then, I don't remember the last time I activated Raging Ravine because I just had other creature lands that I was going to activate, like a Mishra's Factory. So these, the fact that they're so expensive to activate, I just think a different multicolor utility land is probably going to get more bang for your buck when you put them in there. They're fine if you have specific synergies. That's fine, but like that's again, we're corner casing to advocate for them. To me, that just they're C tier. They're fine.
D tier for me. I think if a modular card has modes that never get used, it's not actually a modular card. I think if a land has abilities that you're never actually using, it's just a guild gate. and I think even the potential to do a thing with these in the average deck doesn't make it worth running what is a guild gate the other 98% of the time. Now, I have a deck with multiple creature lands in it, my equipment deck, because there are situations where I'm able to, after a board wipe, play Arden and then turn that Blinkmoth Nexus for 1 mana into a creature and have Arden magically throw 6 swords onto it. Like, that's a really good deck to have creature lands. But outside of like those real niche corner cases, you are just playing a tapped land with a mode that you're almost never going to use, and I don't want to be paying that price for pay extra cost for something that I'm never going to benefit from.
I resonate with that argument pretty strong. I think like I still have some that I would occasionally lean to, like Creeping Tar Pit, for example. So like as a cycle, I'm like, oh, there's some that I kind of forgive a little bit. So that's what makes me feel like I want to be a little bit more generous and put these at sea.
Like I have the Death Touch land in my Death Touch deck thematically. It's not
sure, yeah,
good there, but like there's absolutely like whereas I'm not gonna like be thematically running a Guild Gate, I guess. So I mean, that makes them slightly better, but not by a lot.
Yeah. All right. So we went C for those. Just 2 out of the 3 votes went there. But I do hear your arguments, Dana. You're right. Like the illusion of flexibility when you're not actually using that stuff. That's a good thing to pay attention to for sure. The next ones though. Oh my God, bounce lands. Bounce lands are up next. And I really strongly suspect that you guys will disagree with me. I have these at A.
I can see why they would be A. There's a lot of landfall synergy that you can build around being able to do some fun play around with that. It's fine. I understand why I might put them closer to B tier, but I'm not opposed to them being in A tier.
You get landfall. You can recover a modal double-faced card like a Balagad Recovery if you played it as a land earlier. I use these on turn 2 to get too many cards in my hand, and I discard a huge creature that can revive later. Like, I feel so safe holding a 2-land opening hand when one of them is a bounce land. I even play Guildless Commons in a whole bunch of my 2-color decks, because and that's the colorless one.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
But like, that's just, I really like bounce lands. And it also helps out with little stuff like Knight of the White Orchid effects and things like that if you are paying attention to your land count. Like, effectively, bounce lands are lands that draw you a land. They're lands that draw you a card. Like, they're 2 land drops on a land. I love these, but I'm also probably more excited about them than a lot of other players out there. So, Dana, where are you at with them?
I definitely wouldn't call them an A tier. I like them more than I did once upon a time. This is one of those kind of things. I think these cards tend to be something you like when you first start playing, and then you get better and you're like, I don't like these at all. And then so you come back to them a little bit for the reasons Joey mentioned. There is a lot of tricks you can do. On the other hand, I've seen a lot of players do that. Land on turn 1, bounce land on turn 2, and then someone else table is like, you have to discard a card, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
that's a benefit.
I've seen that happen a lot. Well, it's a benefit.
You discard something to reanimate. It's great.
It's a benefit in like 5% of decks, though. Like, it's not a benefit for a whole lot of people a lot of the time.
Yeah, you can say that there's upside with having to discard a card, but that's in maybe 5% of decks and 5% of games. Whereas the other 95%, it's like, we actually have to play around this. And it restricts when you can play them. So if we're going to go with like the numbers like we have with a couple other cards, then definitely these get knocked down a little bit because of the reasons Dana just said.
Okay, yeah. You guys have outvoted me. B for bounce land. How do is that? We're good with that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily love them there. I think they're... Yeah, I'm fine with that.
The B at best.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I absolutely love bounce lands, but I could talk about them for the whole rest of the show. But we'll move on because now we're stretching the definition of dual lands here. But like, we're talking about color fixing stuff, and we've moved on now to some tri-lands and triomes. They always enter tapped. They tap for 3 different colors of things. The triomes also have a cycling ability and 3 different land types. But let's talk about them together. Lands with 3 different colors of access. Where they land in for you guys?
I think they're pretty good in the decks where you want to run them, 3-color decks. I think you don't want to run too many of them in like a 4 or 5 because then you're looking at a whole lot of lands coming into play tapped. The fact that they're fetchable is really, really useful, particularly the Triumph cycle. They have make-believe cycling on them, which again is one of those modes that doesn't get used. It says they're cycling on there, but like it's such a ridiculous thing to have on those cards. They're really good, though. This would definitely be a B tier for me. The fact that they always come into play tapped is, I feel like, disqualifies anything from going to A tier, but they're a fantastic B tier land.
So I think the triomes, on the basis of getting 3 different colors, it doesn't cost you any life to do. Yeah. Yes, they come into play tapped, but the fact that they're fetchable with 3 different fetchable types, I would put the triomes at A tier and the basically the bivouac and that like from cons, I would put those in B tier just because
Yeah.
when you're playing 3 colors, when you're playing 4 and 5 colors, mana fixing and getting your colors down is very, very important. So the decks that you want them in, you are absolutely going to want them in there.
Yeah, I'm fully co-signing with Matt on that one. And I think that outvotes you, Dana. Sorry, but
I think the bivouacs are D tier at best.
Ooh.
Oh my God.
I think you don't need them. I think, again, you're looking at, I'm going to run a couple of the triomes. I'm running some fetches. I've got some shocks. You're running a City of Brass, a Mana Confluence, an Exotic Archer, maybe. I think they are, it's an unnecessary bit of fixing. You're running a land that comes into play tap. It's fixing a problem that you don't need to have solved.
In a 3-color deck, I 100% would rather run a Bivouac than the second Mana Confluence or City of Brass because
not me.
that's going to get all of your colors. It only comes into play tapped one time, but then you don't lose any more life. And I think that's going to come down to philosophy with you versus me, Dana, where
Sure.
you do like to play fast and loose with your life total.
Sure.
I try to preserve that as much as possible. So I would rather have one land come into play tapped and not cost me anything the rest of the game than a Mana Confluence that's going to cost me maybe 6-7 life over the course of a game.
And I have one more complaint about the Triome cycle, though. I think taken by themselves, they're really, really useful. Yes, you're paying the prices coming into play tap, but you're fixing 3 colors. It's super easy to fetch because it has three land types. That's the first one. The second one and the third one that you're running in your deck, you probably don't need the fixing at that point. You've already got this land out that makes everything. So now you're fixing things that don't necessarily need to get fixed and you're still paying the cost. That's my problem with this cycle is I think it's a thing where the more you run in a deck, the worse they get. And I think that's another reason I wouldn't call them an A tier.
They've been so incredibly valuable in my Tom Bombadil deck because I do have the original duels in that deck just because I have them. I didn't buy them for it, but I had them just from my playing Legacy days. I will more often than not fetch them over the ABU duels just because getting my colors down as soon as possible is just that important in that deck.
Yeah, I like both of these a whole lot. And I think A and B just feels right to me, particularly because, like Dana, in your examples there, you named a whole lot, but a lot of those lands that you mentioned were kind of expensive. And the fact that these, particularly the bivouacs and the tri-lands, can be so helpful for budget players is especially a thing that I feel like I have to put them an extra rank up for that. And I have to put the triomes above the rank there. So that's why I think these end up budging up for me. But during that discussion, Mana Confluence and City of Brass came up. They're a little bit farther down on the list, but heck, let's place those right now. Paying life to get any color of mana that you want. Where are they going?
Confluence and City of Brass were both A tier lands. They always make the mana I want every time. I do not have to care about anything else. That's an A tier land for me.
See, I can't put them any higher than the Horizon lands because there's at least also added utility to them. But again, you're guaranteed to be losing life every time that you use it, unless you're building some specific synergies around that. Yes, having it come into play untapped, but there's a real cost to using them every turn. And if you're playing in a more aggressive kind of pod, stuff like that, that's going to add up really quickly. So I understand the power behind them. But again, I think they're more powerful in the 60 card formats where coming into play untapped, just getting your mana every single turn. I get it, but I can't put these above the Horizon lands that we just put in B tier.
Well, so here's the thing, Matt. I wanted to put the Horizon lands in A tier if I recall correctly, so I'm siding with Dana on this one.
That's fine.
I wouldn't put these in a 2-color deck.
No, I wouldn't either.
But in a 3+ color deck, absolutely. These definitely feel really good. But I'm totally sympathetic to the argument that you're making there about preserving life total. These are some dangerous lands to play with. But you're talking with Dana and I, and we both play a lot of black, so we're used to paying life for stuff. So that's
fine.
Matt, you said this was the definitive list that no one could argue with, so you can't argue with it either, okay?
I'm going to let the audience argue in the comment section for this one.
All right, yeah. That moves us to a really big section here. We'll go rapid through a bunch of these. The Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds, just sort of as a pair. That can, they'll fetch you a basic, it's going to be tapped. Ash Barrens has basic land cycling, but it can enter untapped to give you a colorless. There's also Fabled Passage, which can give you any basic, and it, later on in the game, it won't be tapped. Prismatic Vista, another type of fetch. It costs you a life to do it, but it gets you any basic. And then there's some stuff from Capenna that enters and immediately cracks, or the Panoramas, the slow fetches, like Rocky Tar Pits and all of those. We've got a bunch of different other types of fetchable things. Where are we putting a bunch of these, you guys?
So you guys mentioned budget before, and that definitely changes how a lot of these things work. We are people who have been fortunate enough to be playing this game for a whole lot of years. Not only are we lucky enough to have ABUR duels sometimes, but shocks are not cheap. Fetches are not cheap. The filter lands have been very expensive at various points in the past. And that's just expensive, talking about really, truly expensive. But when you're putting a bunch of $5 lands in decks, that adds up in a hurry too. So even the lands that are, less expensive can get pretty expensive when you're putting 3 or 4 or 5 in the deck. So I think those all have a place in decks where you are concerned about how much money you are going to spend. I absolutely get that. But I don't think we're really talking about that here. We're looking at this in a world where, like, aside from maybe ABUR duels, you probably conceivably are looking at all of these lands as an option for your deck. And if I'm doing that, they're just not playable.
Ooh.
Unless there's some weird super synergy where, like, I want as many fetches as possible because I'm doing landfall shenanigans, or I have a commander that cares about sacrificing things. But if I'm just, like, brewing a generic commander, these aren't making the cut in any of my decks.
Okay, I'm sorry. Big pause. Fabled Passage isn't making a cut in any of your decks? Like, what?
No, I don't need it because there's enough other lands that do the job. It just doesn't, there's just not room for it. I'm not going to bump out an Odyssey Filter. I'm not going to bump out any of the other lands that we talked about in the B and up tier. At that point, there's just no room in the list. It's not about whether or not they're good. It's about whether or not they're good enough. And they're not good enough when you have access to all those other lands.
See, I was just going to go a hard C tier for all of them. They're fine when you need them, and they're good budget mana fixing. And I think, Dana, you kind of alluded to your way of evaluating all of these where you're just taking budget out of the picture and just what is the best.
Sure, absolutely.
I can't take the budget factor out of it because sometimes you just need something that's going to be quality for, a starter deck, a new person getting into the format where they aren't as lucky as we are to have been playing for a while and happened to get duels when they were cheap, relatively cheap, I guess. And so the Evolving Wilds, Terraforming Expanse, they're fine. I don't love them, but I think C for all of these, especially like Prismatic Vista, where that is just way too expensive for what it does. Fabled Passage, more often than not, Prismatic Vista it's a card that is very, very powerful in 60 card formats, but that power doesn't carry over into Commander. Honestly, they're probably just as good as the Evolving Wilds and all that stuff in Commander. C tier for all of these for me.
Okay, I gotta jump in, but there are some absolute stinkers here, like the slow fetches, for example.
The slow fetches I have in D tier, yes.
I have them at F. Like, the slow fetches enter tapped, and most often the thing that they fetch for will also enter tapped, or will struggle to enter untapped. These look good on a budget, but they're actually like double the slowness. And F tier for me means that even on a budget, I would not play these. And in fact, for these, especially on a budget, I wouldn't play these. There are so many other options if you need sacrifice synergy or landfall synergies that don't mess up your tempo the way that these do. And that, on the opposite side of the coin, is why I like Fabled Passage and Prismatic Vista. Passage is only $5. I'm sensitive to the price of Prismatic Vista being too high for the effect. That makes sense to me. But for much of the time, these ones don't affect your tempo, which is what I like about the MDFC dual lands that we mentioned earlier. I also like Ash Barrens more than Evolving Wilds or the others. Just personally, like, I'd play Ash Barrens in a 2-color deck, even though I wouldn't play Wilds in a 2-color deck unless it's a specifically landfall or grave or sack synergy kind of deck, because if I want to tap land, I'd prefer it to give me 2 colors rather than just have for 1 color. So for me, with the budget fetches, if it can enter untapped, if it has an untapped option at some point, that is what I like to see from those fetches. I'm cool with C for the classics, but I am just overall with this discussion, I'm surprised that Dana is so down on them. Just the ability to get them back from the yard, or with like Savine's Reclamation effects, or using landfall, all of these little extra things that they can do means that for me, I can't push the traditional Evolving Wilds below C tier in any way.
But I think it's tough to judge though. I don't want to rate them based on this like specific niche deck where you care about landfall stuff, because like outside that, who cares? So I'm trying to like be a generalist about this, and whenever I've built super budget decks with like a hard cap of $20 or $50 or whatever it is, what I've found is I was almost always better off in a 2-color deck running just 17 of each basic than I was trying to run Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds hurt my gameplay, and just running all basics didn't. So I have a tough time rating these lands very highly, again, outside of a super niche case or like a budget 4-color deck where you just don't have access to stuff, because they're worse than basics most of the time.
In budget, like multicolor decks, I really struggle to fault somebody for playing some of these just to get their colors down. There's a couple other cycles that I know I'm higher on than you guys are, just because they offer so much utility for the 10, 20 cents that they are. So I get why people are playing the Evolving Wilds. I don't think Ash Barrens is, honestly, in my opinion, and I might be wrong about this, YouTube comments, I don't think Ash Barrens is all that much better than Evolving Wilds.
Interesting.
That's just me, though. You have to pay mana to do that. Whereas, like, the Panoramas, the fact they tap for mana on their own accord, I think there is value in that.
Ash Barrens also taps for mana of its own accord.
But you have to play it, then you lose your fetch ability.
But your tempo is fine, and like I don't know. I think that like it's fine to put a whole bunch of these at C. Like I think that the fact that we are having a debate about whether or not they work better than a basic is what C tier means to me. So I'm fine with that.
Sure.
I think none of these are. I think maybe Prismatic Vista is a C. Everything else is a D or is a D or lower.
I can't. Maybe the Capenna stuff. I don't particularly like those.
The Capenna ones that pop it instantly. Yeah, I've never considered it for a deck.
Yeah, all right. That was a great big section of stuff, but we've honestly, I think we'll kind of like talk about these next ones in a section as well. There are some creature type matters lands like Guiltleaf Palace. They'll enter untapped if you reveal a specific creature type from your hand. In that case, like an elf. There's a couple of those floating around out there. There are some future sight lands, a cycle of those that are very unusual and have a bunch of different effects. The tainted lands as well that give you multiple colors, but only if you control a swamp, and then also some storage lands, which actually might qualify more as utility lands than as actual like dual lands or color fixtures. But these are also very awkward to place, don't you think?
I can't put the Future Sight cycle in one because some of those lands are actually, like, if they finish those cycles, some of them would be very, very different from the others. The Palace of Clouds, I believe, is the blue-white one where if you have an island, you get to tap it for blue. If you have a plains, you get to tap it for white. That one, if they finish the cycle, I think that's perfectly respectable as a land. But the rest of the cycle, like, I don't love the blue-black one. Grove of the Burned Willows is fine. I would rather give my opponent's life because I know I'm not going to kill them by like 1 or 2 points of life. I'm going to kill them by 30. And so Grove of the Burned Willows, I think, is totally fine. And so it's all over the place. The creature type lands, they're a D because they're only good in very, very specific decks. That's probably where I would put the Guild Gates. Like, if the Guild Gates are good, they're amazing because Gate decks are very real. But if you're not playing a Gates deck, you have, like Dana's pointed out, you have so many more options, even at the budget level.
And Dana, how about you? Where are you at with these?
I just don't know what I would. The problem with all of these is like, what do you cut for them, and why are you running these instead of something else that's more consistent? Even the typo lands, I feel like have that same problem where, sure, sometimes it does this thing, but this land always is going to work for me. I don't have to worry about like maybe just not having a creature in my hand or something. So these, to me, I seem are much weaker. The future sight lands are a crapshoot. Like Matt mentioned the Azorius one. If we had access to that in green, where you're much more likely to have multiple land types because you're going to fetch with green land fetch and oftentimes getting something with multiple land types. Yeah, that would be a really strong cycle if you had access to it in something with green. So like that would change where I would evaluate those. But given what we have, I don't run any of these, I don't think, in decks anymore, any of the 4 that don't have finish cycles, or 3, I guess it is. They're fine, but there's been enough things that are more consistently productive for me. So most of these they're playable, but I don't think any of them are particularly noteworthy necessarily.
I think the only one that I'm kind of like maybe are the tainted lands.
Yeah.
Like I struggle with those sometimes, and I play a lot of black, but even then, like I'm not playing these in 3 color, and I've had some. They've sometimes not worked for me, even in 2 color. Where I'm just like, oh dang, they feel like a more advanced version of check land, and I definitely prefer to have a check land. So yeah, how are we feeling about where should they go then?
I mean, it's so hard because in the decks that they're good, they're very good in, but like in a majority of decks, they're just filler. And so C or D tier, I don't think that they're F because like we said, they're fine in the right circumstances. They're playable. A lot of them are budget friendly, but I mean, you can do better.
The tainted lands have the advantage of, in a budget environment where you're probably running a whole ton of basics because you're on a budget, they get way, way better. Yeah. If I was playing a very tight budget, then the tainteds are excellent because odds are I'm running 14 swamps in that deck in a way that I wouldn't normally be doing.
Gotcha.
So I would rate those above the rest, but not by a lot.
So like C tier and then D tier for a lot of these other ones?
Yeah, I think so.
The storage lands, I don't remember the last time I even put those in a deck.
At least those I would have there's a note where like if you were playing a deck with a ton of proliferate synergy, they can be pretty decent.
Yeah, but if you're playing a Gates deck, then Gates get exactly. Yeah, right. There's only so many Gates decks too.
I just wanted to make that note. I don't think that makes them any better. It's just like they do have a use in a way that some of these lands I don't think do. the Vivids, for example.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So it sounds like D, but there's some asterisks on a lot of these, is what it sounds like.
Very asterisk heavy on like this little section here.
Totally makes sense. You know what doesn't have asterisks is just stuff that is tapped. Urborg Volcano, just enter tapped. F tier.
Yeah.
Hate these. Dislike button, 0 out of 10, unsubscribe. I don't like these.
There's some great art on some of these lands too, which is unfortunate. But yeah, there's just there's no reason to play them.
It stinks that they're still finding their way into pre-constructed deck environments too. That's where it really stinks, is because again, it gives the illusion to newer players that like these are a good type of card to be putting into your decks, when really they're not. Even if there's 50-cent options that are higher up on this list that are going to get you more bang for your buck, then it's always going to enter battlefield tapped. There's no real specific synergies. It's just a land. Yes, it's a duel, but enters tapped.
I would just run basics over these every time. For
sure. There's a little bit of a complication for the ones that enter tapped but have actual land types, though. We've mentioned a couple of them before. They're really great for budget. There are also some snow versions of them, too. So, like, I think some from Dominaria, some from Kaldheim, Woodland Chasm, Radiant Grove, these types of things. I assume since we put the previous tapped thing into F tier, these maybe go in D tier?
So I'm going to advocate for... There's a lot of value to newer players for having basic land types. I personally have these in B tier because not everybody has the money for Shocklands. And I know...
Yeah, fair.
Like Dana, you pointed out, there's so many options, but for newer players trying to figure out kind of what the next step is, these are so valuable. They're so good for the new player to see like, okay, now I understand why this is so good. Oh, that's what makes a Sacred Foundry so good. And yeah, I would pay the 2 life. So that does make sense. I personally have them in B tier, but I think C, where most decks are going to have some sort of basic land synergy, putting them around the same tier as what I prefer this over basic, I think this is kind of definitively that conversation. So I would like to see them in C tier, especially the snow lands.
I'm going to put the snows in C, and we didn't mention them, but the artifact lands, the bridge cycle.
Oh, yeah.
I would put in C as well. And for the same exact reason for both of them, I would say, you talk about something like Evolving Wilds that I was very down on. Yes, it has some landfall synergy, and that's useful, but there's a lot of things that will get you there. There's a ton of lands that will crack and do a fetch and let you get that double landfall every single turn. There's not a lot of things that are a snow land. In a deck that needs that, the things that will meet that goal are way narrower for snow. The decks that care about artifact count, there's not many lands that do what that does and are fetchable. So while it's the decks that want them are maybe relatively narrow, very few things can replicate what it does, whereas a lot of things replicate an Evolving Wild. So that's why these, I think, despite being relatively narrow in what decks want them, I would make them a C because it's just not something that a lot of things do, whereas, like I said, Wilds has a lot of things that do that.
Yeah, the uniqueness of the effect, I think there is a lot of value. I do agree, Dana.
Okay, so a lot of those, and since we're talking about a bunch of these tapped things, I mean, budget decks also tend to favor those gain lands as well, like Scoured Barrens, ETB tapped, but you gain a life. Would those land in the same spots?
I don't hate it in C tier, maybe D tier. I mean, I still have these in a couple of decks because like I don't want to go out and buy a $5 upgrade when like this is getting me by just fine. So like I still play the gain lands. I don't think if you're building optimally you would, but I mean they're fine.
I think it's funny on turn 1 when someone plays 1 and they gain a life and everyone's like, oh, you're already winning. That's always, that never doesn't make me chuckle. And that's the only thing I can say about them.
Okay. So C for the whole lot of them.
I mean, I'm not even sure I'd call them a C. I probably would have called them a D because I don't think the life gain is enough of an advantage to make them worth considering. Even in life gain decks, 1 life doesn't really trigger very much or doesn't tend to make a big difference in a way that, gaining 8 or 10 life does. To offset it coming into play tapped, but
I've seen them trigger some cool stuff in life gain decks before, but
yeah, I prefer them to be in C, but like I would get why they would be in D too.
Yeah, I think just sure. Yeah, just like it's easy to just throw the whole lot of them in there.
Dana's getting outvoted. That's fine.
Sure.
The Vivid Lands, can we agree though? I see these are next up on our list. Vivid Lands can just be like D or F.
I don't like them either.
I don't.
They're super useful and limited, but like that's it.
They're fine bridge cards or bridge lands, I should say, because they help you get from the early game to the late game. But the limited uses versus always being able to tap for 2 different colors, I don't love the Vivid. I mean, 10 years ago, Vivids were great, but these especially have been paced.
Those blue auras that give a creature -4/-0 are also awesome and limited, and you don't play them in EDH.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think that there are a lot of folks who have like used these in proliferate decks, and that might be kind of interesting for them. But also just like the labor of actually putting the stuff on your lands. I'm just like, oh my god, I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
But Matt, I am curious. Vivid Grove compared to Thriving Lands, and there's also a series, a cycle from the Baldur's Gate as well. They enter tapped, and they definitely tap for one color. Like Thriving Isle definitely taps for blue, but then you can also choose a color, and it can tap for an additional thing there. I mean, I kind of feel similarly to those as I would about the Vivid Lands, but
Ooh.
it seems like you feel differently, and I'm curious why.
So these probably are some of my favorite budget lands, just full stop. I think these are absolutely fantastic, especially if you're trying to build a cheap 3+ color deck. The fact that you can select what land, or what color I should say, that you're missing and hit that. Yes, it comes into play tapped, but the same kind of arguments go towards the tri-lands enter the battlefield tapped. I love these. These are personally in my B tier.
Whoa.
I know that not everybody thinks that way.
No way.
So the value for the new player being able to create a very effective budget mana base, these are kind of the backbone of that. I like these more than just a regular, Selesnya Guildgate, because you get to pick the color that you're missing. If you want to dog on them, remember Hall of Famer Brian Kibler plays the Thriving Lands in his decks, and he effectively has unlimited budget too. So
here's the thing though, like every single time if I'm playing something that definitely is tapped, I'd rather have the Radiant Grove effect. I'd rather have something that I could actually fetch out with a Nature's Lore or something like that. Like that strikes me as more potentially valuable.
I just think that the flexibility behind these, especially when, and this is kind of my point of emphasis, Dana's is the lens of unlimited budget. We're just talking the best no matter what. I can't take the budget out of there. I think these just bang for your buck, the 10, 15 cents that these cards are, just getting somebody into the game. These are so good. I love these cycles. I was very excited for limited, but then also I'm like, they're actually just fine in a 3-4 color deck.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with Matt that these are like, if you are playing a 4-color deck on a $30 budget and you've been playing for 6 weeks, and it's, a full moon on the Ides of March, then these are probably really, really good. I don't disagree with that, but I think like the amount of times that's relevant is pretty narrow. And the fact that like that person's situation is going to change, they will probably have a little more budget, get a little bit more familiar with the game, and then will swap these out for something else. Whereas I think if a land is good, it should just be good. It shouldn't be good contingent on what you know and how you play, and I don't know. I see what you're saying, but like I have a tough time. I have a tough time using that as a way to evaluate them. You're not wrong, but I don't think that necessarily makes them better in my opinion, based on how I'm evaluating lands. At least these always do the thing.
Yeah. Okay. Them always doing the thing is a really good point, Dana. So like I think that makes a distinction for the Vivids to be D, but then the others can go up to C.
Well, we've got some lands to go below it here soon. So
that's definitely true. A whole slew of the next ones that we're going to talk about all enter tapped. We've talked about the Guild Gates before. We've also got some Campus cards from Strixhaven, and there are some New Capenna ones. They have different effects that you can like pay for mana, tap them, and you get the like sacrifice them to draw a card or something like that. I don't like them. I think they're bad. I think the Gates get a D just because Gates decks are cool. I like that. But the Campuses and the New Capenna lands, I would also put those in F tier because I think if you're using them, it's bad. I think that you're not winning that game anyway, and these cards trick you into thinking they're good.
Yeah, like Dana said, if the modal cards have a mode that isn't used, they're not actually modal.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of these are actually modal. Like paying effectively 5 mana to draw a card, that's a steep. I would 1000% rather run the cheap-ish now Horizon lands than these Campus cards.
Yeah, I'm just not playing them.
And the same goes for a series of Kamigawa lands that can tap for colorless, or they can give you a color, but then they stay tapped on the next turn.
Absolutely F.
These are in here just so we can dunk on them. These cards are bad. They're in F tier. They're so awful.
I will note the ratio to how bad they are to how good the art is probably greater than it is on any other cycle in Magic. There's a bunch of gorgeous pieces of art on these, and they're all terrible.
Man, Joey said that he wants to dunk on these. I wanted to Kembe Mutombo these and like smack them out of people's hands. Just go, no.
Just give them the finger wag as you bat it off into the stands.
Heck yeah. Oh, that's terrific.
Not in my house.
Okay, we've got, at long last, a final cycle of cards that can be 5 colors. Command Tower, any color in your commander's color identity. That's amazing. Exotic Orchard can produce any color that your opponent's lands can produce. Reflecting Pool giving you any color that you can already produce. Forbidden Orchard, which can give you any color, but it gives an opponent a 1/1. And Path of Ancestry, always enters tapped, but it gives you any color, and you can scry when you cast your commander or something that shares a type with it. Whole bunch of potentially 5-color lands, and they're really good in like decks that have more colors. I've got some big thoughts here, but I'm going to let Dana start us off on this final foray.
So I was actually writing an article that I need to submit in the next couple days that might beat this show out. We'll find out.
Ooh.
Where I talk about cards that have too many words, and because of the words in the card, people think they're worse than they are. Path of Ancestry is better than the like Bivouac style Tri-lands, but people don't realize it is because they think they need to run it in a typo deck. Even if you have 0 creatures of the appropriate type in your deck that match your commander, it's still strictly better than a Bivouac style land because it taps for the same colors and it will give you a scry on occasion when you cast your commander. Path of Ancestry is not something I'm going to hard jam into a ton of decks, but if you're going to run one of those Tri-lands, it's better than the Tri-land.
I mean, I would even argue that it's better than City Brass and Mana Confluence because you're not losing life to do this either.
Yeah, but it enters tapped. But
so,
yeah,
it sounds. Since we're having that discussion, like those we had put at A tier, I was also solidly going to say Path of Ancestry A tier. Does that sound like where we're all landing?
It still feels like a B tier to me for Path. I like it a lot, but it doesn't feel like what I would look at it. And I don't see that card and think that is an A tier card. It just doesn't feel, whatever that means. It doesn't feel like that to me. But I like it a lot.
I mean, I think Command Tower is strongly S tier, but the other ones, Again, I think Path of Ancestry is better than Mana Confluence. It comes into play tapped, who cares? It doesn't cost you any life over the course of the game. So it's got to be A tier, I guess, if you're asking me, because we put Mana Confluence and City Brass there. I don't love Forbidden Orchard giving my opponents spirits every time I use it.
Yeah.
There's no flexibility. You just need your mana. And so I would put Forbidden Orchard maybe in C tier, but the others, I mean, B or A tier, I guess.
Dana said he'd rate Path of Ancestry above the Tri-lands, and we had the Tri-lands at B tier. So I think Path of Ancestry, it just it has to go above there, just given where we've already placed stuff. And Dana, I also think you're totally right. Like, people do sometimes overlook what the utility is on these. I really, really enjoy Path of Ancestry, and I have it in any deck that has multiple colors. Just full stop, because I'm going to scry when I cast my commander. Why not? And it gets even better with more colors. It's terrific. Forbidden Orchard, though, I don't think I can put that as C. Like, the number of Skull Clamps running around out there, giving my opponent a 1/1, I really have to be committed to Group Hug to be playing this one.
Sure.
So that one ranks like D at best for me. I don't know how y'all feel, though.
Yeah, I unless you have some super synergy going on with it, I also would not want to run it these days. Like you said, too many Skull Clamps, too many things that care about sacrificing. You're just asking to get burned.
Yeah, it feels like this could absolutely be a thing that contributes to you losing the game.
Yeah.
There are decks that can make use of it, like, I'm going to give you a thing and I goad it, and like that's really cool. So there is like a situational thing that makes me feel like that's why it could be in D. But I think in plenty of times it could actually like mess up your ability to do stuff. So.
I mean, giving your opponents blockers is never a good idea. So
that leaves us with Exotic Orchard and Reflecting Pool, giving you colors based on who's got what, and these definitely rank high for me.
I mean, I don't love needing your opponents to give you the colors. I would just rather play a Command Tower or a Tri-land, and then I have all my colors that I need. So I would put one a little bit above the other, but I mean, they're both good. Again, WotC has started giving us a few more reasons and a few more interesting 1 and 2 color commanders. So it sometimes isn't very reliable to count on your opponents to have all the colors, especially if you're playing that in a 5-color deck.
Yeah, Reflecting Pool is really easy to wind up in a situation where you have it in hand and you have nothing else that makes colored mana, so it doesn't do you any good. Whereas Exotic Orchard is almost always going to make you something with a color, and particularly if you're playing in a 4-pod, one of those colors is going to be one of your colors, if not both, if not 3 of them. Just like statistically speaking, Exotic Orchard is almost always a battle bond land, if not better. Reflecting Pool, I dig less just because there's those couple early turns where you don't have the ideal hand. It's not going to bail you out, and I've had Exotic Orchard with not an ideal hand to bail me out. So I think Orchard is better. It's definitely a tier higher. I would probably put Orchard as a B and maybe Reflecting Pool as a C.
Oh wow, I was going to go with Orchard as an A and Reflecting Pool as a B. I like both of them in anything 3-color or above. I don't think I play either of them in 2-color decks, but I do really like them. If I'm playing multiple colors, like I want them both.
The more colors you're playing, the better Orchard gets, and I think the more colors you're playing, the less likely Reflecting Pool is to help you, particularly the first couple turns. So I think Pool gets worse the more colors you're playing, and Orchard gets better.
Interesting. Yeah.
Again, Archer doesn't feel like an A tier card. It's an exotic Archer. Maybe that's because that's been reprinted 190 times. I have a tough time calling it an A tier card for that reason, I guess, which is maybe arbitrary. But I think it's a better card than Reflecting Pool at the very least, and it should be a tier higher.
I mean, in order to keep this bell curve that we have so perfectly going, I think putting them in B or C is what's going to aesthetically keep the audience going to the comment section, letting us know how wrong this list is.
So, guys, we've finalized our little list here. Are you happy with where things have placed? Like, does this look right to you? What do you think?
I mean, aesthetically, yes. Everybody loves a good bell curve. But I mean, there's a few that we have disagreed with. But I think overall, I think it's a good list to, if you're getting somebody in the game or just talking with people kind of like, okay, how do I upgrade my decks? How do I take that next step? It's a good list to have as far as, there's arguments for this, that, and the other. And yeah, there's some nitpicks, but again, we're Magic players. We like to nitpick.
I mean, I would downgrade a third of these cards. I would knock like a third of them down one tier.
I knew you were going to say that.
But that's fine. And again, I think a lot of that is like personal brewing and playstyle preferences. And for mine, a lot of these cards like feel like they don't perform at the level that you guys think they perform at. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying like based on how I build decks, they don't feel that powerful. That might be different for somebody else who builds in a different way and plays in a different meta, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of subjectivity here. Subjectively for me, I would bump a lot of the C's down to D's and a few of the B's maybe even down to C's, but I don't have any massive objections.
And meanwhile, I want to put bounce lands up another tier. So, yeah.
Yeah, but again, like there's so many, like all three of us are coming at it from very different points of view. Where like, sure, if you have an unlimited budget, you're never going to play anything below the A tier, but that's not the case for 98% of the player base. And so I think you have to give some of these more consideration than you might want to in this perfect world. So wait, like Dana, I'm thinking back over your comments. Are you saying that maybe this isn't the objective, definitive, absolutely 100% true type of thing that we always said it was? No, it is. It still is.
I think this is a good combination of our ideas about what's right, and if people really want the like true objective tier list, they can DM me and I'll give them the accurate one that isn't the combination.
I mean, my personal one also looks a little bit different, and like as y'all said, listeners are going to feel very differently about this too. But in terms of our evaluations and our deck building and a little bit of averaging out,
it's a good representation of a combination of our three opinions.
Yeah, there you go. And this is also like really fun to do. I hope that folks really enjoyed watching and listening to it. But listeners, we already know that you're going to let us know where you think these different lands should have fallen. Which ones do you rate higher and which ones do you rate lower? And honestly, like we'd love to see your versions of this tier list too. Let's see if we can like link it in the description of this video so that you can make one and screenshot it for yourself as well. Because this is also just a really fun exercise to do. So I've had a blast doing this thing. I'm just looking at all these lands and they're so pretty. I'm going to go mess around with the lanes in my deck now. And while I'm doing that, I think maybe you guys should let folks know where they can find you online if they'd like to tell you about their tier lists. Let's start with you, Matt.
Well, you can find my undisputable, amazing tier lists over on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's Instagram, Blue Sky, whatever you want to go to. It's all there. Mathimus55 on all of them. But yeah, you can see our finger paintings too at EDHRECast, also on pretty much any social media platform as well.
And Dana, how about you?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. You can find my articles on EDHREC and Commander's Herald, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me at Joseph M. Schultz online. Most likely I'm being a fool on Instagram or something like that. And you can find the cast at EDHRECast everywhere online. Plus, if you got a question for us, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Our thanks to once again to Chase for their fantastic work in the post-production of the show. You can find them online at Mana Curves. And listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.